Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. Today we have another in-person game we filmed at the Battle Standard in East Windsor. It was a fun but long game. Plus, we even got to see a new brew from Fernando. Also, if you like what you see, consider joining our Patreon, as with your help, we can keep producing the videos you enjoy. And if you want to play with us, hop on our Discord. We have an ever-growing community that loves to talk MTG or whatever else strikes our fancy. And we would love to meet new people. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. Starting us off is Fernando, and that new brew I had mentioned. Clan Crafter Lulu, Loyal Hollyphant, is a proactive stax list, as Fernando was tired of not having a win condition in the Azorius colors. This is a stax control list that aims to pressure his opponent's life total with his creature suite, while using Lulu as pseudo-vigilance and an anthem. This deck can grow quite an army, helping it go over other stax lists, while using that same stax creature package to stop any combo players. Overall, it's definitely an interesting take and was a blast to see in action. Next up is Jimmy on Sythis. This is Selesnya Enchantress. It is Enchantments Matter strategy that utilizes Sythis' innate card draw to outvalue his opponents. It generates a lot of mana and can really churn through the deck once it gets going. In the third spot, we have Hidden Planet X and his Mighty Morphin Dwarf Rangers, with Magda at the helm. This is a mono-red combo list that uses Magda's insane ability to generate lots of treasures to not only ramp, but search out key artifacts, and oh boy can it win quickly. And bringing up the rear, we have MTG Loots on Tymna Tana. This deck is otherwise known as Blood Pod, and it's what's known as a Meta Crusher deck. It's a stax deck that is highly customizable to what you want to hate on. Its goal is to grind the game down and gain advantage, since you know what stax pieces are coming. Tuned to a specific meta, it can often hold the entire table down, but only if tuned properly. And without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. Fernando starts off the game with an Aganjo, into a Sol Ring, and a Mycosynth Lattice. He finds a Plains off the top, and ends his turn with a Mox Opal. Jimmy has a Mox Diamond, and discards a Marsh Flats. He then cracks a Verdant Catacombs for a Savannah, and shortcuts by casting his commander Sythis. Hidden plays a Snow-Covered Mountain, and casts a Ragavan. Loots has a Savannah, and casts an Elvish Mystic. Fernando needs a creature to block the monkey, and plays a Plains. He casts a Mana Vault, and still needs a blocker. He casts his commander Lulu, and ends his turn with a Cathar Commando. Jimmy casts a Seal of Primordium, triggering Sythis for a life and card draw. He plays a Serra's Sanctum as land, but is done after that. Hidden has another Snow-Covered Mountain, and sends Monkey at Fernando, assuming he wouldn't risk either of his creatures. And he was right, as Fernando takes the hit, and exiles a deep-known Terramancer, and Hidden gains a treasure. The gnome unfortunately doesn't do much for Hidden, and he ends his turn casting his commander Magda. Loots shocks in a Sacred Foundry, and enchants his Savannah with a Wild Growth. He still then has 3 mana left, and casts a Ranger Captain of Eos, which on ETB grabs an Esper Sentinel, with Fernando at his end step Enlightened Tutoring for a Bident of Thassa, to start gaining some card advantage. Fernando takes 1 off his vault, and then cracks a Scalding Tarn to find a Tundra. He then casts his Tutored Bident, and heads to combat. Jimmy does debate whether or not to pop the seal to blow the Bident, but ultimately he decides the seal is worth more than Fernando drawing 2 cards, and lets him declare attackers. Fernando sends Lulu at Hidden, and the Commando at Loots. Both players take the hit, and Fernando draws 2, and he then heads to his end step. He triggers Lulu to untap his team, and gain a +1/+1 counter. Jimmy untaps and casts an Enchantress's Presence. He gains another life and card draw off Sythis, but doesn't have a land drop and passes. Hidden untaps and plays another Snow-Covered Mountain. He wants to move to combat, but everyone has blockers. He decides Jimmy is the least likely to block and sends his team that way. Hidden creates a treasure off Magda being tapped, and Jimmy then heads the blocks. He does block Magda, and at this point Hidden should have guessed Jimmy was holding up a trick. But he was impatient and channels a twin-shot sniper to deal 2 damage to Sythis. And just as anticipated, Jimmy was holding up his favorite card in the deck, Blacksmith's Skill. And having sunk too much into this attack, Hidden fires off a Tybalt's Trickery to counter the spell. He then randomly chooses to mill 2 cards off the top, and Jimmy then starts exiling until he finds a paladin's class and casts it. This really doesn't work out super great for Hidden, as Jimmy then draws 2 cards and a life from his Sythis, and the Enchantress's presence. But Sythis is then killed off and damage happens. Hidden gains another treasure and exiles a Seal of Cleansing off the top. He decides to use his treasures to cast the seal, as it's really good against Jimmy, and now that Hidden has used so much of his resources, he knows he needs to try and play a longer game. Lutz plays a Mana Conflux's land and takes 1 off the land to cast his commander Tymna. He then moves to combat and sends his Ranger Captain at Hidden and his Elf at Jimmy. Both players still can't block, and on his second main, Lutz pays 2 life to draw off Tymna. He then ends his turn with a Deafening Silence. Fernando loses another life to his tap vault, and Lutz heads out to grab an order of food for the table.
Did you already pay for it? You want me to run over? I have no action. Yeah, you guys can. I'll run quick.
No actions, so he won block?
Say it's...
Alright, well, just don't... It's relatable. I'm doing God's work.
Yeah.
I'm doing God's work, he says.
Fernando then casts his background and follows it up with a Gilded Drake. He ends up switching places with Lutz's Tymna. There you go, now he can block.
I don't remember the name of it.
That's true, but...
Dragon one.
Fernando then stacks his mana vault to his background to draw a card and put a counter on his commander. He then heads to combat and sends Lulu at Hidden with the commando at Jimmy. Now before damage, Jimmy casts a Force of Vigor, exiling a Savage Summoning to destroy Hidden's Seal of Cleansing and Fernando's Bident. This does prompt Hidden to pop his seal to destroy Jimmy's presence, although knowing Magda, it might have been better to target Jimmy's seal, as Hidden really needs to be able to stick artifacts of his own. Attackers then connect, and on Fernando's second main, he pays 2 to draw off his stolen Tymna. And at his end step, he triggers Lulu for an untap and a counter. Jimmy plays a Plains and casts an Argothian Enchantress. He follows that up with a Heliod Sun Crown, finishing his turn drawing off his Enchantress. Hidden starts off his turn with a Metallic Mimic, naming Dwarf. He then heads to combat and sends his Monkey and Magda at Jimmy for 5. He gains 1 treasure off Magda and another one when the monkey connects. He exiles a Gemstone Cavern off the top, and he then ends his turn with a Soul Guide Lantern, which exiles the Enchantress's presence that he destroyed earlier.
That's a nice 3/3 flyer that you have there, right?
Yeah, thank God.
What could you do without it?
Wizards in it to make that work. Without it.
Lutz is looking for lands and casts a Florian. He then heads to combat and sends the Ranger Captain at Hidden and the Gilded Drake at Jimmy. Both don't block, and on Lutz's second main, he triggers Florian to look at the top 6 and exile a card to play for turn. And while he doesn't find a land, he does find a Collector Root, with Hidden now really wishing he didn't use that twin shot so early.
Oh man, those mana rock.
Off the top! What was it?
Swords.
Yes. Actually, because it's not... hold on, let me take it.
Fernando ultimately decides to not kill the Oof immediately, and cracks a Misty Rainforest for an untapped Hollowed Fountain to take an additional 2. He then heads off to combat and sends Tymna at Jimmy. Lulu heads at Hidden, with the Cathar Commando then heading at Lutz. Everyone takes their lumps, with Fernando drawing 3 cards off Tymna. Fernando then casts a Welcoming Vampire and heads to his end step. He untaps his team and actually has to discard 1 card due to hand size. Jimmy starts off his turn recasting his commander Sythis. He gets to draw off his Enchantress and finds an Ancient Tomb off the top. Jimmy originally had leveled up his Paladin class, but ultimately decides not to, as he forgets it's only at sorcery speed and passes thinking he can hold up his mana. Hidden untaps and doesn't like his hand. He's actually pretty desperate and casts a Jessica's Will, hoping to find either some dwarves or maybe a spicy dragon off the top. He gains 7 red and reveals 1 dwarf, this one being a Dwarven Armorer. He plays an exiled snow-covered mountain and ultimately has to pass, as Hidden thought Jimmy could activate his Paladin class, so he didn't have a clean attack. Lutz starts off with combat. He sends Florian at Hidden and the Drake going at Jimmy. Both players take the hit, with Lutz activating Florian to again look at the top 6. This time he exiles a Meltdown, as Hidden's day gets even more bleak. Lutz plays a Forest. Lutz then meltdowns for 2, and this does trigger Fernando's Lattice to grab a basic Plains. Lutz then casts an Esper Sentinel, ending his turn with a Fiend Artisan. And even though Lutz wiped the board of artifacts, Fernando still swords the Collector Roof at his end step, with the only upside for Lutz being Fernando forgot about the Esper Sentinel and has to give him a card. Fernando plays a Prismatic Vista as land and cracks it for Plains. He then heads to combat and sends the Welcoming Vampire at Lutz. The Commander goes at Jimmy, and Lulu goes at Hidden. Fernando did debate where he should send the Tymna, and settles on Jimmy as well. Fernando then gets to draw 3 from the Tymna and cast a Thalia, Heretic Cathar, and Alliance Ash. He gets to draw from the Welcoming Vampire, and finally ends his turn with a Mana Crypt, giving a card to Lutz from the Sentinel. Fernando then heads to his end step, untapping his team and another counter. Also, Jimmy did level up his Paladin class now, and while this was a mistake, Jimmy would have simply done it on his previous turn had we realized. And Fernando also has to discard again due to hand size. Jimmy untaps, and fearing he doesn't have another turn left, silences. He gives a card to Lutz, but the silence resolves. Jimmy then pops his seal to destroy the deafening silence so he can cast his Whirly Tutor. He finds a Walking Ballista to put on top and draw for turn. He realizes now that the oof is gone, Fernando actually does have mana to pop his Commando. But the table soon realizes that Jimmy's unfortunately a mana short of what he wanted to do. So originally he thought he had 6 mana left after his Whirly Tutor. But after sacrificing his seal, his Saracenium only taps for 3 now, and along with his Ancient Doom he's left with 5 mana. He needed 6, 2 mana to cast the Ballista. It will survive due to the Paladin class, and the 4 remaining so he can double activate Heliod. That way he can activate it again in response to Fernando popping his Commando. But after much discussion with the table, we find it that the best course of action is probably Jimmy just casting the Ballista and wait. If Fernando ever did tap out, Jimmy could activate the Heliod in response. Hidden draws, but has nothing great as he casts a Dwarven Trader and then a Smuggler's Copter. Lutz untaps and plays a Plains. He then activates his Fiend Artisan, sacrificing the Elf to grab a 4-drop. He grabs a Grim Hireling, and then casts a Chalice of the Void for 0 before heading to combat. Florian heads at Hidden, and the Drake heads at Jimmy. Once again, there are no blocks, but Lutz is so set on his Hireling play to get his 4 treasures, he forgets about Florian. Lutz then takes 1 for a black, and sacrifices 2 treasures to kill Thalia. He then uses the last of his treasure to kill the Lion Sash, and ends his turn there. Fernando untaps and plays an islet as land, and heads to combat. Jimmy is still representing the combo, so Fernando sends Lulu and his Welcoming Vampire at Jimmy, with Tymna and the Commando heading at Lutz. This is enough to take him out, and not wanting to kingmake, Jimmy dies without doing anything. Lutz does end up chumping his Commando, and on Fernando's second main, he casts a Solitude to exile Lutz's Grim Hireling. He plays and cracks some Marsh Flats for a Plains, and then casts an Opposition.
You gonna tap my dwarfs for me?
Fernando then taps his Solitude to the Opposition, and on his end step, he untaps his creatures, with Hidden tapping to crew his Smuggler's Copter to gain 2 treasures. Hidden untaps, and on his upkeep, feeling like he's just going to win, Lutz sacrifices his Ranger Captain to silence Hidden, who crews his Copter with his 3 dwarfs in response. He gains 3 more treasures, and now having 5, sacrifices them to Magda to go searching to see if he can still win. Unfortunately, as Hidden goes searching through his library, he doesn't have the win. He did have a Liquid Metal Coating in hand, and this would have given him the win if he grabbed his clock, but the silence is stopping him. He debates getting a dragon, but Fernando has too many creatures, so Hidden settles on a Maskwood Nexus. And while he can't win, Fernando does decide at this point to tap down his Ragavan with his Opposition. He does give Hidden a treasure, and Hidden then goes to his draw step. Unfortunately, he doesn't draw a creature and passes the turn after that, with Lutz then casting an Enlightened Tutor at his end step for a Soul Ring. Lutz untaps, draws, and goes to his main phase. Unfortunately, Fernando realizes that he should have used his Opposition to tap down Lutz's land during his upkeep. And this fear is realized pretty quickly, as Lutz then casts a Vivian on the Hunt, who upticks to sacrifice Florian to grab a Felidar Guardian. which enters and flickers Vivian, who upticks again to sacrifice the cat for Karmic Guide, which then brings back Felidar Guardian to flicker Vivian again to sacrifice the cat, this time grabbing a Kiki Jiki, who then taps to create a copy of Karmic Guide for the cat. This lets him flicker the Kiki to re-tap for another cat, creating a horde of hasty creatures to take the table out and win loots the game. Game review. Well, unfortunately for Fernando, he almost had the game. All he had to do was make it to his turn and take his opponents out. But misplays happen, and nothing to do over spilled milk. I do think his deck really did well this game otherwise. His growing creatures really put a pressure on his opponents, and while I think the list does need a little more tuning for this specific meta, I liked how it's shaping up. As for the rest of the table, I think Hidden was too hasty with that twin shot. I think if anything, he should have let the trade happen and recast Magda, as he really wasn't doing much else. And he ended up spending his treasures anyways. Also, both a Collector Roof and a Meltdown really hurts his game plan, and he wasn't able to find a wheel to help him regain some of that lost card advantage. As for Jimmy, I think he really should have risked it and not blown up the Deafening Silence. I know he was worried about counter magic, but at this point Fernando had revealed he wasn't running much, and bearing him from actually miscounting his mana, I think he would have been able to sneak a Worldly Tutor in, and most decks right now have trouble counterspelling creatures as it is. As for loots, I don't think that there is much overall to be said. I think he did the best he could, and it was funny that it was actually Fernando's Thalia that stopped him from comboing out the turn earlier. But thanks to all players, and I'll see you guys later.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I just wanted to let you know that we have a TCG affiliate link, and if you ever see a card you want to try or are inspired to brew something new, use our link when purchasing and we'll receive a small portion of the sale. This is a great way to support the channel, and if you enjoyed the gameplay, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps us keep making videos. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.